Well, we're joined tonight by Ajmal Masroor, an imam who leads Friday prayers at 4 different mosques in London, and Caroline Farrow, who writes for Catholic newspapers. Good to see you both this evening. Ajmal, can I start with you? What do you think needs to happen now?
Well, he needs to apologise immediately, retract his words, and Conservative Party needs to do something very drastic, and that is it needs to investigate Islamophobia that has become institutional within the rank and file in the party. It's not the first time. It's happened before, and we're very worried if we leave it unchecked and unchallenged, it's going to get worse. But if Boris Johnson just came up and said, look, guys, I made another gaffe, really sorry, I think most people would say, OK, don't do it again, be very careful, but you're only talking to a very small minority of people, the right-wing elements who would otherwise be called as racist bigots. I don't think Boris Johnson wants to be known as supporter of racists and bigots in our country.
Caroline?
I think it's very unfortunate, actually, that what's being focused on are two phrases that he used. And actually, the wider point of what Boris Johnson said is being missed. If you read his column, he was actually defending the right of Muslim women to wear the burqa or the niqab, but actually expressing his own personal opinion, which he's entitled to do, which is that he doesn't like it very much. And so people who are saying he shouldn't have an opinion, well, why not? You know, we're all allowed an opinion. And actually, in this country, it's not bigoted, it's not phobic to say that our cultural tradition is that we normally keep our faces uncovered. Now, Boris wasn't saying that we should ban the burqa or force people to uncover their faces all the time, but just in certain contexts, it is appropriate to do so. So I think we need to focus more on the substance of what he was saying rather than throwing easy labels at him.
I think we are focusing on substance. Boris Johnson has said before, Islam is the problem. That wasn't that long ago. A headline he made saying exactly that. It seems like that he has an issue with Islam, which is fine. We can take on an intellectual challenge with Boris Johnson to talk about Islam, the religion, and his ideology or his philosophy. But to personalize it, to call Muslim women who may have chosen to wear burqa, that they look like bank robbers or look like postbox, is not just deriding, is not just mocking, it's below the belt. Would you call people like Hasidic Jewish communities who are walking in Stamford Hill wearing a particular uniform which is very sensitive and very sacred to their religion by a deriding name? You wouldn't. Why would you do that to Muslim women? Are they free for all just so that you can attack because they're visible? I think Boris Johnson needs to be more responsible, and media needs to also make sure that he is challenged. Remember, he was our foreign secretary. And a lot of people are waiting for him to become the Prime Minister. The day he becomes Prime Minister of our country, with such views, I'd say it's time for all of us to quit.
Caroline, you're a Catholic journalist. Look at the traditional nun's habit. Now, it doesn't cover the face, it covers everything else. You wouldn't want them to be described in unpleasant terms, would you?
And they often are, of course. And no, I don't think it's fair for people to be pejorative. But at the same time, when I hear nuns called for pejorative names, which I do all the time, I think the common one is penguin. I'm not there saying this is Catholic phobia, this should be banned, this person should resign. I might say, OK, that's a bit of an ignorant comment. But actually, let's look at the substance of what Boris was saying. You know, Catholic nuns, they don't cover their entire faces. And this was exactly what Boris was talking about.
But Catherine, there is a point we have, a major point that we're missing. 250% rise in Islamophobic attack last year on verbal and threats and intimidation. Physical violent attack, 150% rise. 25% rise on other criminal activities, because I believe many people make irresponsible statements which could inspire those idiots and thugs so that they would carry out those criminal activities. I'm not saying Boris is responsible for that. I'm saying we need to be responsible, especially a person like Boris Johnson, as well as my friend Caroline over there. We should all stand together from the same pulpit, as I call it, the pulpit of faith, and say no bigotry, no hatred in our name.
OK, Caroline?
OK, but what is the bigotry here, OK? Bigotry is when you force an opinion on another. Boris wasn't forcing an opinion. He was giving his own personal opinion. He wasn't actually inciting hatred against Muslims, against Muslim women. He was, in fact, saying if you start banning items of clothing, if you start banning the burqa, if you start banning the niqab, then actually that could whip up Islamophobia. But actually, you know, his point was that when a woman dons a burqa or a niqab, it makes them look rather shapeless. And he used the letterbox analogy. Now, I think that's a little bit rude and crude, but actually, isn't that the entire point of the burqa, is that it actually does render a woman completely shapeless? And therefore, can't we have a better debate about female modesty? You know, some men I know feel quite offended by the fact that women wear burqas because they think, hang on, are you saying that I'm not able to, you know, control my sexual impulses? And I think there's a much more sophisticated and nuanced debate.
Well,
and
Caroline, whereas you know we'll move on to that in a second, but in the sense that you've said that some of the language isn't appropriate, but away from the substance of what Boris Johnson was saying, should he then apologise for the language he used?
I think it might be worth him saying, look, I didn't mean to cause offence, but I think any apology is only worth the paper it's written on if it's genuine. And therefore, I don't think Boris should be hounded into an apology. Far from it. I mean, he was trying, you know, Boris Johnson is Boris Johnson. He was trying to be witty, but I don't think he was trying to incite hatred. And in fact, it was very clear that he wasn't. And I think we have to be very careful about saying to people, you can't say this because it might inspire somebody else to do that. Everybody has...
Ajmal, aren't we missing the point a little bit in all of this? In that, as Caroline says, Boris Johnson, you know, wasn't saying we need to ban the burqa. These women should not be wearing a niqab or a burqa or anything else. He was actually defending their right to wear it, and as Caroline said, but saying, yeah, I don't like it. I don't like the fact you can't communicate in the same way.
I commend him for standing up against the Danes, who absolutely have got it wrong, just like the French have got it wrong. But you can't just say, look, forgive me, I don't want to be insulting, but then you insult me. It doesn't work like that. You're a responsible person. It's not a Joe Public from the street. It's Boris Johnson, absolutely right. The former mayor of London, foreign secretary of our country. He's a heavyweight in our country. When he says, people listen. And when you say something like that, it's like that judge who said, you have the freedom, but you're also got to be responsible with your freedom. I support his right to speak out. I support his right, or anyone's right, to criticize Islam as much as they like. We can have a fantastic discussion over it. But what I don't like is pejorative term, deriding term, insulting term for anybody.
But I mean, you started off, didn't you, by saying that you thought that it was a bit of a racist comment?
Very much so, in the sense of Islamophobic comment.
But our Sky poll today has got, you know, nearly 60% of people saying actually they don't think it's racist.
Well, the word racist is a problematic one, because Islam is not a race. Muslims are not a race.
No.
Muslims are multiracial people from all backgrounds. You know, every country in the planet would be represented by them. So the question is absolutely misleading. If you ask people, was it Islamophobic? I think vast majority of them would say yes. Islamophobia is just the same as what we talked about when it came to anti-Semitism. The Jewish communities have agreed on a definition. If somebody doesn't agree with it, they need to argue but not publicly deny the right of the Jewish communities to hold on to that definition. Muslim communities have presented a definition of Islamophobia. Boris Johnson has committed what we call Islamophobia crime. He needs to say sorry. We need to put the records right, and we need to take out all conversations of Islamophobia from our conversation, but be free to criticize Islam anytime you like. I'll join you, and we'll have a fantastic discussion over it.
Yeah. Caroline, I mean, there's a fair point there, Caroline, isn't there, in saying, you know, because we've been talking about it with anti-Semitism recently, you know, the guidelines that have been drawn up, causing so much controversy for the Labour Party at the moment. But if the Muslim community is saying, we consider this to be Islamophobic, we need to take that seriously, don't we?
I think so, but I also think that the Muslim community is a very wide one. And, you know, not all Muslims have this tradition of wearing the full burqa or the full niqab. And in fact, I think the Quilliam Foundation have said that they don't support wearing the burqa or the niqab. So it's only by saying, look, this is not something that I personally like. This is, you know, against, you know, as Boris did, you know, personally, it's not to my taste. He's not insulting all Muslim women. He's not insulting...
Can I ask you a very important question? You've just used Quilliam Foundation as a reference. Quilliam Foundation represents nobody from the Muslim community. It's a think tank that has been set up by private funding. They perceive and they develop their own views, so they're responsible for what they say. But if you do a poll of Muslim community in the country, I can tell you all Muslims by far would say what Boris Johnson has said is wrong. It is Islamophobic. What Conservative Party has failed in doing is establishing and eradicating Islamophobia from its party. So we are calling for the same thing. As Baroness Warsi said, institutionalize Islamophobia, racism, xenophobia, homophobia, and anti-Semitism must be wiped out from our country once and for all.
OK, look, on that point, we do need to leave it there, I'm afraid. Ajmal, Caroline, thank you both very much indeed.